I first attended my first fisheries seminar at Auburn about 51 years ago. So I've been around the block a number of times on fisheries seminars. I really enjoyed seminars, got a lot out of them over the years, so I've spoken at many of the seminars and attended a lot more of them. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to go around one more time and providing seminars. I also appreciate Lynn for asking me to come in. You know, when you're department head for a long time, as I was, you get to the point where if you want to talk to somebody, you can find somebody to talk to as a department head, and they'll listen as long as you want to talk. And over a period of time, you really get to where you like the sound of your voice. You get to loving the sound of your voice. But when you retire, you may know everything, but nobody ever asks you a question. And even at home, my wife will tell me, now don't you use that department head's voice on me. So it is nice to have an audience for 50 minutes, and you better watch me. This is a real opportunity. I don't get many captive audiences anymore. You can't slow people down anymore when you've been retired for 10 years or so. I think that just about everybody in the country now, and it has been that way for a long time, would agree that this is the top fisheries program now in the United States. At one time, we might have shared that honor, at least partially, with the University of Washington. But with the problems they've had in the last few years, I think with all the things that have happened to this program, all the places we work, all the things that we do, you've chosen to come here as what is the top fisheries program in the United States. It is a world-class program. It's not only one that's recognized in the United States, but recognized throughout the world. It is an outstanding program, and I want to tell you a little bit about the very earliest days of that program. But I want to tell you to begin with that not everybody in this community would share that appreciation for this program with you and with me. We had a student from Mississippi a number of years ago that came to Auburn to get a master's degree, and while he was here, he got to know a young lady in the community, extremely well, and they were very good friends, and they had a very warm relationship. In fact, we just knew that before the time was over that they would get married. But time went on, and he finally got his degree and went back to Mississippi. But he came back here a couple of years later, something like that, and he wanted to go out and see how the family was doing and see that young lady. And so he went out there and he was talking with her, and there's a little boy running around in the yard out there. And he said, well, now whose child is that? I don't remember a baby coming along like that. She said, well, that's our baby. He says, that's our child. He says, you mean mine and yours? She said, sure it is. He says, well, why didn't you let me know? Why didn't you tell me that you were pregnant? You know that I wanted to marry you, I really loved you, and I would have done anything to have married you. She says, I understand that, and I know you're an honorable person, and says, this was a very hard decision for us and the family. We talked about it at length over a long period of time, and we decided, the family and I did, that we had rather have an illegitimate child in the family than an Auburn fisheries graduate. So, but anyhow, not everybody would agree most of us that this is an outstanding program. But I would like to let me apologize to begin with by talking about ancient history. When you get my age, that's all you have to talk about. There's not much future out there, so you mostly talk about ancient history. So I want to tell you a little bit about the people and events who set the cornerstone for this program. And I'm sure that a program that started in the early 30s, I'm not even sure that your parents were alive then, but anyhow, it goes back a long time. And if you'll bear with me, I want to tell you a little about how this program got started and some of the events that helped shape it. I would contend, and you've probably never seen this and would have no reason to see it, but this little mimeograph publication here, put out by the Agricultural Experiment Station in 1938, entitled Management of Farm Fish Ponds, was really the cornerstone for this program. And that's a long time ago, but I think that with the things it accomplished when it was put out, and it's a little mimeograph leaflet, I'll talk about that a little more later on. But this particular publication, the public, nobody in the United States had ever seen anything like this or heard anything like this before. generally fishery biology in those days, you just had to contend with what nature gave you. The fact that you could manufacture a fish population and manage that population was unheard of. People just could not imagine that this could be done. This was just beyond anything that ever imagined that they could do. Now, everybody understood that you could do this in agriculture, all phases of agriculture by that time, but fish and wildlife, certainly fisheries, was something you just could not manage to this extent. In 1938, when this little publication came out, the Soil Conservation Service had been in business since 1935. Now, this is a nationwide organization. In 1938, Vern Davidson, who was a chief biologist with that particular organization, came to Auburn just after this publication was put out, and he saw the publication, he saw what Swingle was doing here, and this Auburn approach to fish management, pond management, establishing water-holding ponds on rural lands, became so important to the Soil Conservation Service, they spread it all over the United States. This little idea of managing ponds swept across the country almost like wildfire. So this one little idea, this one little publication, really helped to establish the cornerstone of this particular program. By 1940, they knew enough about management of farm ponds that Swingle and his cohorts were out working with local farmers and how to manage their ponds. In 1941, and this will show you that not only the public and the people across the country was interested in this, but even the university became interested in it. Money was hard to come by in the early 1940s, but the university spent enough money to go out and buy that land at the lower place at North Auburn, the one we call the lower place, just across Saugahatchee Creek, an old abandoned cotton farm. But the program had achieved enough importance at Auburn at that time that the university was willing to buy that land out there just for the fisheries program. You couldn't do that today, and it would be more difficult to do it then. In 1941, the chief of fish hatcheries came to Auburn and decided we've got to begin to send our biologists down here to learn something about this program. So this idea of managing farm ponds began to sweep across the country, to get it in place in most of the federal agencies. And after that time, the biologists, a number of those fisheries biologists, hatchery biologists from across the country came to Auburn to study the techniques that were being used here. In 1942, they redid this little bulletin. By that time, they knew a lot more about managing ponds, as I'll talk about later. And they published Bulletin 254. Now, I think that's interesting to mention that number. At that time, 254 bulletins had been published at Auburn in the college, in the Agricultural Experiment Station. But number one was a publication on growing carp in Alabama ponds. The experiment station director, Mr. Newman, had constructed a few ponds down where the Arboretum is now, and had stocked them with carp. So the first bulletin written at Auburn, experiment station bulletin, was on the production of carp in farm ponds. In 1948, the State Lakes program began in Alabama, constructing state lakes in areas that did not have a lot of natural fishing, and those ponds were constructed and managed based on the work that had been developed here at Auburn. So you see the program now is reaching out across the state, it's reached out across the nation. In 1953 then, the whole program was propelled onto the world stage when Swingle went to the Pacific Science Congress in Manila and began to talk to people about aquaculture. So you see it by 1953, after this publication in 1938, by 1953, the Auburn program was not only well recognized across the nation, but then the world began to understand it. And then after that point, the world history is pretty much, you're aware of it. But it was in these first few years that this thing, really a number of events that worked together to really propel this thing out across the country and around the world. And we benefit immeasurably from that work today. Now I want to go to kind of a timeline thing and to show you some of the things that happened back in those days. This is to give you a better picture of the characters and the facilities, the place they work. This is E.V. Smith is on the left there and Swingle on the right. This is a pond out near Farm Pond 1, and they're involved in some of the early work of draining those ponds and counting the fish. But these are the two individuals that provided most of the impetus to this early program. And that's where a lot of that work was done. The very early work was done out there in that area. Oh, the series of concrete pools out there, they're no longer there. In fact, most of these ponds are no longer there. But Swingle and Smith, Smith finally went on to become the director of the Agriculture Experiment Station, the dean of the College of Agriculture, and Swingle stayed with this program through that the whole time. The lower picture here is another aspect of the program. The beginning thing, the hard-nosed, hard, long-term effort in doing research, counting fish and plankton. The most important thing, though, that finally came out of this was the extension, the ability to get this information. These are probably SCS agents that come from all over the United States to check some of these ponds and to see what Swingle was doing with them. I want to go ahead and look at some of the other things. This is kind of a timeline there. Swingle's we first see him on our radar screen as far as fisheries is concerned in 1930. He made some records on fishing in Lake Martin. He recorded how long he had fished, what kind of bait he had used. This is the first time he comes up on our screen. Now this is the first time I want to mention a little bit about the events that were taking place that helped set this program. In 1930, they did not have enough money at Auburn to pay the staff for a long period of time. They paid them in script. You did not have money, and local merchants would bear the brunt of redeeming that script in groceries and clothes and whatever they needed. There was no money doing research with. They hardly had enough money to keep the people on the staff. But most of the staff did stay on, although they didn't have any money. You couldn't buy chemicals, you couldn't buy anything. There was no money. And so they spent a lot of time fishing, an awful lot of time fishing. It's amazing to think about an experiment station being so poor that the dean and director finally says, do what you want to. I can't ask you to do any research because there's no money. And so these people began to, a number of the faculty members, Swingle being one of them, there are a number of others, that began to fish. Now, fortunately, by that time, Lake Martin, the construction on Lake Martin had started in 1923. By 1926, the power part of the thing had started, so it had filled up. And by 1926, there was an outstanding fish population, expanding fish population. So these people that had never had any decent fishing in this part of the country, if you can imagine how poor the fishing can be in some of these streams that we have around here in this old igneous rock province, the waters are acid and there's no fertility in them. Lake Martin was a mecca with the kind of fishing they had had. But this idea of you can build these big bodies of water and you can get good fishing out of them had an interesting effect on these people. They said, now why can't we do this in our community? Look at Lake Martin. It's a wonderful place to fish, best place we've ever seen. And it was amazing. That, by the way, was the first of the great dams built. And at one time it was the largest artificial body of water in the world for a few years. So it was a wonderful place to fish. A number of these faculty members got interested in fishing in Lake Martin, and they decided we could do the same thing at Auburn. We can build a lake at Auburn. So they came back then, and Swingle was involved, a number of other families, faculty members around Auburn, involved in building what they call Lake Auburn. Most of you have probably never seen Lake Auburn, but I'll tell you where it's located. At least you'll remember a little bit about that part of the history. If you go on the parkway going into Shiwaka State Park and turn to the right on that dirt road just before you go into the park, down there about a quarter of a mile, there's a dirt road that turns off to the right. That goes into the Auburn Outing Club where Lake Martin is located, Lake Auburn is located. In 1932, Swingle assisted with the stocking of Lake Auburn. And I want to tell you, and along night, Swingle didn't know on how to stock ponds. He had no idea how to stock ponds. Now remember, he wrote a publication in 1938 telling you exactly how to do it, so he learned a lot in a short period of time. But that's what they stocked it with. Now in 1935, there's a period in there between 34 and 35. In 35, the dam broke on that pond, and they rebuilt it, and so in December 1936, they stocked crappie in there. This is a picture of two fishermen with some of those Lake Martin bass. This is what really set the fire underneath these faculty members to build a pond of their own and to stock it and have some local homegrown fish. This individual on the left is F.E. Guyton. He taught economic entomology here for a number of years, and was really the first fish person that we had at Auburn that had any interest in it. One of the oldest fish collections in the South is a fish collection that's in our collection here, are fish he collected about 1916 to 17. So if you ever need a reference collection, a reference fish for some of the things that happen today, the fish that he put in that collection go back a long, long time. He was the only person that ever had any interest in fish up until that point. And he was a great fisherman. He was also a wonderful teacher. This is Funchess on the right, the man that they named Funchess Hall for. He was the dean and director for a long time. This is an interesting story. He was key to starting this program. You couldn't do anything at Auburn without the approval of the dean and director. You couldn't spend a dollar for anything. He really ran a tight ship. And he was a workaholic. He worked all the time. But he worked too much, and finally his health began to have problems with his health. And the doctor says, look, Dean Funchess, you're going to have to find something else to do. You're going to have to find some kind of pastime. And he decided to take up fishing. If he had not gotten sick and had that problem with his health, I doubt if he'd ever spent a dime on this program. But he was involved in it and interested in it, and if it hadn't been for his interest in it, he would never have allowed them to put that money into North Auburn. Another thing that happened, that, you know, a lot of events, we think of people doing great things, and people can't get along without people, but events shape people, the things that people can and cannot do. In 1933, they started the agricultural legislation, the Agricultural Act of 1933, and another thing that Roosevelt and the Democratic Congress at that point did was to establish the Conservation Work Administration. And they used some of that labor. They decided that the experience they had at Lake Auburn, after they stocked it and fished it for a year, it was so horrible that they figured somebody, if he didn't know any more about that, somebody ought to do some research on it. So they decided, we'll build us a pond and we'll do some research on fish ponds. So they started the work then on Farm Pond 1 with the Conservation Work Administration labor and money. 1934, the Purnell funds, these were funds approved by Congress. The act was in 1925. It was for the support of research at agricultural experiment stations. So they got some money out of that and started the project on production of food from freshwater fish. The project personnel, I think, fascinating. Swingle is an entomologist. He's a pecan and peach insect specialist. Smith was a plant physiologist, also a PhD. It's interesting that in that time there were very few PhDs at Auburn, very, very few of them. And E.V. Smith was one of the few PhDs we had in the College of Agriculture. And then Scarsis was a soil scientist. These were the people that started this first project. Now, there's not a fish course in that whole group. Smith didn't even like to fish. I don't know about Scarsis, I don't think, though. Swingle was the only one that really enjoyed fishing. There was no background whatsoever in fisheries in this group. If there had been, I think we'd never had a project. I think we'd never had a project, because the fisheries people of that day were primarily naturalists, and they didn't have electric shockers. They didn't have all those things. They couldn't tell the age of fish from the odorless. What you generally did as a naturalist is you essentially, and I'll simplify this, you go out and sit by the side of the stream and try to understand what much Mother Nature is telling you. Well, they took a different approach. They said, we're going to force Mother Nature to answer the questions that we had. After all, it's being done all over the place in agriculture. It had just never been done like this in fisheries, certainly not anywhere in the South. So they said, we are going to write a project, and these people are going to use agricultural techniques to try to get Mother Nature to answer some questions about the way that you ought to stock ponds and you ought to manage them. And about that time, in 1934, Farm Pond 1, the D ponds and the brood pond were completed. Now, this is Farm Pond 1. In case you don't know where it is, you have little need to consider it anymore, but they call it the Beef Evaluation Unit, or more commonly the Bull Testing Unit. It's on Suge Jordan Parkway. If you go into that Bull Testing Unit, the pond on your right then would be Farm Pond 1. This was a water supply pond for all the research that's going to take place, at least for a little while. You see, it's been in a little while now, and there's already a lot of mud accumulating. There was back up on campus and all that area back up there. There were no trees, no vegetation, so you're getting a lot of sediment in this pond. But one other thing I want you to look at, if you're thinking about an idea catching people's attention, look who's standing out on that box, on that platform. City people came out in droves. They couldn't imagine anybody doing research on fish. I mean, it's done all the time with cows and hogs, but doing it on fish, they had to come out and see it for themselves. That was the kind of response you got all across the United States to this new idea of growing fish in ponds, of stocking them and managing them. Townspeople came out with their best clothes on and sat down and watched them get those fish out of the pond. That's E.V. Smith down in the hole there. A lot of the time wasn't long before he began to work between this project and the dean's office, and finally became the dean and director. These are the D ponds. These are 1/120th acre ponds, and the most god-awful place you could ever imagine in your life to do research. They lined these ponds with Susquehanna clay, because that area where they dug those ponds, and this is right below the dam at Farm Pond 1, right below that road going into the beef evaluation unit. They dug those ponds, and of course there was a lot of sand and gravel in there. It wouldn't hold water, so they lined them with Susquehanna clay. And over a period of time, that clay came off the wall and settled down in the bottom, but they were able to get 3 or 4 pretty good years of research out of them. The boards around it to keep frogs out. They had a real problem with tadpoles, so they had to try to keep frogs out of them. The little pond on the right is a brood pond. So there are 20 of these things. One of them was impossible to work with, and they're pretty much abandoned. So they had 19 ponds. This is where the cornerstone, I'd like you to think otherwise, but this is where the cornerstone, where these little bitty ponds and the information they got out of there was extrapolated to almost a worldwide scale. And it's absolutely amazing that the mental processes that went on in these individuals, that they could understand how to take this information and expand it, extrapolate it the way they did. But these are the D ponds. And of course it's all been plowed over now. It was covered up when the Animal Dairy Science took over that place out there. There was also some ponds directly across the road from that point. The sea ponds were over there, and there's also a series of about 100 concrete pools over there where they did a good bit of work in the early years. All that's been bulldozed away, and there's no sign of it. But that's where your history came from. That's where these people spent their time. This is the D pond. Either the D pond. In 1934, Farm Pond 1 was completed, and so they got around to stocking it. And I want to show you that Swingle still didn't have a clue on how to stock a pond. This is what he put in there. Bluegill brim, orange-eared brim, Alabama red-eye bass, put in 12 adult and 5 yellow bullheads. If you want a recipe for disaster, this was it. This was it. And that's what he stocked that pond with. In 1934, remember we're three years or so now from writing that publication. In 1934, he didn't have a clue. He's going to learn a lot in a short period of time. And he's got those little 1/120th acre ponds to learn it in. If you can imagine stocking yellow bullheads in there, but that's what they understood in 1934. Now, another thing that's really interesting here, and I'd like to say that he used this pond, Farm Pond 1, and learned a lot from it. But he didn't. What he decided to do, what he and Smith decided to do, is they were going to take this pond and they'd put fish in it. They'd drain it at the end of the year, count all the fish, and put the same ones back in there. They didn't learn anything from it until after this publication was already out, because they still put the same mishmash of fish right back into the pond. But that's what went into Farm Pond 1. And he continued to drain that pond for 5 years. That was his plan, and he never deviated from that. 1934, the pond fertilization experiments were initiated in the D ponds and also in the greenhouse. It's amazing how much work they actually did in the greenhouse on fertilization. It's also interesting that the first real problem that they attacked in this overall process was pond fertilization. Just like in agriculture, one of the first things you got to do is to be sure you got your soil fertility up. So the first thing they did was try to discern, and somewhere along the way, I guess from German carp culture, but I'm not even sure where the idea came from that you ought to fertilize these ponds, because they had no fish experience at all, but decided that some of the first work would be on pond fertilization in the greenhouse. And they took these jars, these battery jars, used different kinds of fertilizer, and measured using an old forest centrifuge, and centrifuge the plankton out and dry it and weigh it and try to determine the best combination of fertilizers. And then later on, they moved this research into the deep ponds. Before any work was done on stocking the fish, they did the fertilization work. In 1935, now this is 1 year later, not 2 years of research. By 1935, the commonly used ratio, 882, with a little nitrate of soda, generally 882, 684 plus 10 pounds of nitrate of soda. By 1935, they had arrived and determined that this was the best combination of fertilizer used in farm fish ponds. About 18 months after they did the first work in the greenhouse, they came up with this, and we still use it. If any bulletin that you want to look at from across the United States on how much fertilizer you put in a farm pond, it's going to be an 882. And it came out of about 18 months of research, most of it being in the greenhouse, and then finally some of it was validated in the earthen pond. There was an awful lot of guessing going on, an awful lot of guessing, but it was educated guessing. I think I've never seen anybody in my life, and I knew him well for a long period of time, that could use deductive logic and inductive logic as well as Swingle could. His father forced the family to do this. As he was coming up, they'd have the children, at night they would get the children involved in debates, and you had to take one side one night, the other side the next night. He was a genius at using inductive and deductive logic. Otherwise, he would never have come up with some of these conclusions in such a short period of time. He's drained Farm Pond 1 again and taken the fish out and put them back. In 1936, 2 years after they had the ponds available, he began experiments on deep ponds on stocking rates of bluegills. Also that first year, he published a publication on fish ponds, a pretty good kind of a number of where they're located, how many you have, and didn't accomplish very much, but it's interesting to go back and look what he had to say about it. Here they've drained Farm Pond 1 again and restocked it, and that year, 1936, the soil scientists left the project. Now these deep ponds, and talk about them a little bit, this is the heart of this project we're talking. This is it. This is the nitty-gritty. Remember, they're 120th acre pond, 120 to the acre. You have to multiply by almost infinity to get it up to an acre. Fish around 1 ounce each when they're stocked, and all ponds are fertilized. Now this is the stocking rate. This is where the cornerstone came from. 120th acre ponds. 3 of them were stocked with 10 bluegills per pond. 1 of them was stocked with 25. 2 of them were stocked with 50. Now this equates to 1,300, 3,265, that many fish per acre. When he drained the pond, this is what he found, the average size of fish. In the 2 tens, fortunately, they came out the same. 2 replications. And, you know, 2 replications that's going to determine pretty much the history of this project. 2 replications. They determined that certainly or actually 3 replications. They determined the growth was not good enough on 25 or 50 or 50. So they decided that somewhere from this, 3 replications in 120th acre pond was sufficient to recommend that you had to have at least that many fish in a fertilized pond. You could have that many and get good growth. This is the heart of, this is where the cornerstone came from. As this 1 year in which they stocked these ponds. Now they would do this over and over again later on in many other ponds. But in 1937, we're 1 year away from publishing that paper. This is all they knew about it, and this is where it came from. The conclusion from this was that for adequate growth of bluegills, the number must be limited. These are conclusions, things that you just know now. They didn't know that back in those days. If a pond is fertilized, a maximum of 1,500 gram per acre may be added. I don't know where the 15 came from, because this was based on 13. Here again, they kind of interpolated, extrapolated in their mind and came up with 1,500. If possible, you ought to get fish from the hatchery rather than trying to get them out of the stream. So these were the conclusions based on that one experiment. 1937, a new project was funded, Bankhead-Jones. In 1937, this was another federal act that provided more money for agricultural experiment stations. And they continued research on stocking rates of bluegills. And Swingle published, put out a publication, Raising Fish Worms in Tubs. This is another interesting thing about him, is he thought about fish. It never occurred to him that the only thing you're going to do with fish ponds, the only effect they were going to have is people are going to enjoy fishing. He knew that if a lot of people fished, you'd have to have a lot of bait. Because in those days, if you wanted to fish for a day, you dug bait for a week. So he came up with this idea of growing worms in tubs. Now this got him in trouble with the dean and director, who was a real stickler for research information, because Swingle only had a few tubs in the basement of the old fisheries building, which, by the way, is underneath the north end of Funchess Hall. So he decided that he'd publish this thing. He grew some worms in the basement so he'd have some bait to fish with. He decided he'd write a publication on it. Well, he did that, and at that time the dean and director had to approve everything you did. So he said, you're not going to publish this thing, you haven't done any research on it. If Funchess hadn't been a fisherman, I don't think he'd ever let him publish it. Here, Farm Pond 1 was drained into fishery stock. They're not getting anything out of Farm Pond 1. 1938, the mimeographed version of Management of Farm Fish Ponds, published by the Experiment Station. Let me tell you, if you don't know anything about the Experiment Station publication, I'll tell you a little bit about it. It's important. When you see a publication that has bulletin on it, that means you've got all the corners nailed down. You know everything there's, just about everything there's know about that particular subject. You've got everything all nailed down. You've got all your T's crossed and your I's dotted. You know everything. If you have a circular, that's one just a little bit less than that. You know a little bit less, but everybody's convinced you're on the right track. If you have a leaflet, they think, well, this is a good thing. This is something that's a good idea. We better watch it. If you mimeograph something and put it out, all that indicates you've got a good source of toilet paper. It just simply, it has nothing to go with it. It's just, it has no information behind it. I'm amazed that they put this thing out, but Funchess was really in love with this project at that time and willing to lean over backwards because he was a stickler on publishing things. He just wasn't going to let you put his name on the thing unless you pretty much knew what was going on. So in 1938, they published this thing. Now, here again, here's the information that came out of the greenhouse, plus 18 months in the ponds, 100 pounds of 684 and 10 pounds of nitrate soda. That's gospel. Write it down. That's just like John 3:16. That's gospel. Apply intervals, April through September. Stock in unfertilized ponds, 50 bass or crappie for our fingerling. Now, you see, none of the experiments I've told you anything about said anything about using a carnivorous fish and how many to use. He'd never done any research on that. There's no research, absolutely none, in any annual reports, where by the time he wrote this thing, he had any idea on how many carnivorous fish to use. So he makes an educated guess. He says, use 50 bass or crappie. At that time, he didn't even know that crappie wouldn't control the reproduction of bluegills, but he wrote it down anyhow. Stock fertilized pond, 1,500 brim fryer fingerlings, 200 bass or crappie fryer fingerling. He's off on his bass, but he's not far off. You can still get by putting 200 in there, but your bass size is going to be a little low. The fingerlings, the crappie fingerlings, forget it. They're nice fish, but you're not going to get anything near a balanced fish population. But this is what he said: production expected, unfertilized pond production expected, and these are right on. But he's never done it. It's never been done to say what you're going to get out of an acre, because he's used 1/120th acre ponds, and very lucky to have almost no very low variation in those 3 reps. Growth expected in the first year, and these are things that we learn. If you're in all these courses, they're gospel, and they came out of that thing, this 1938 publication. I remember what he did not know as late as 1934 and even 1935, but here in about July of 1938, he pretty much has it nailed down. He also, I don't know how he knew this, but in 1938, having constructed only one pond of any size, they wrote a bulletin on construction of farm fish ponds. Also, another mimeograph thing which shows you how much they believed in it. Farm Pond 1 drained and restocked. They also, he started in 1938, they had built some other ponds, Farm Pond 2, Farm Pond 3, and Farm Pond 4. All of these are out in that general vicinity. Farm Pond 2 is over beyond Farm Pond 1. The dam went out on that and was never replaced. Farm Pond 3 is in the forestry plot, forestry area, and Farm Pond 4 is down below the facilities division over there. But now he's got these extra ponds. Let's see what he does with them. Now, the manual, the bulletin is already out, or getting ready to come out. Now let's see what he did with these ponds that he had. One, they're still restocking Farm Pond 1. Farm Pond 2, he stocked with 1,500 bluegill fry and 200 gambusia. There's no, he's written a publication now, and said you got to have a carnivorous fish, but he did not stock them in this pond. Farm Pond 3, 1,500 bluegill fry. He's got his bluegill fry, but he's put in 200 crappie. Farm Pond 4, 8 adult brim and 100 crappie fingerlings and 8 large flathead catfish. Where in the world do you think that came from? Nobody knows. But anyhow, the publication is already out there, but it's though he doesn't even believe himself, because he's still stocking ponds with fish that just don't make any sense. Okay, 1938, the conclusion. Apparently it is necessary to add carnivorous fish to eat up most of the smaller fish if satisfactory growth and satisfactory production of legal-sized fish is to be secured. Now, he's already written a publication, but then this is his conclusion from that year's work. In 1938, I told you about Vern Davidson coming here. 2 papers were presented in 1938, fertilizers for increasing the natural food of fish in ponds and relationship between plankton production and fish. These, if you go back and look at these publications, because back in those days when they'd go to one of these meetings and they'd present these publications, they would spend maybe an hour, maybe 15 or 20 minutes presenting the paper, and then they spent 3 hours discussing it. It's interesting to look at some of the discussion that went on as people were trying to grasp this new approach to fisheries, the things that they were doing here at Auburn, and the questions they asked, and the arguments that he got into in some of those meetings. But here, this stuff now was beginning to get out into the scientific literature. 1939, the publication is already out. It's already widespread. People are already beating the path to the door at Auburn. And then they decide, runs what is read of the Cornerstone experiment. Now the Cornerstone paper is already out, but this is the first time without any understanding exactly where it came from, when he actually did the experiment that would prove that he was pretty much close on all those stocking rates. He stocked Farm Pond 4 at that time. It's about 1.4 acres. He stocked it with 1,500 bluegill fingerlings, 100 largemouth bass fingerlings, and put in 3,632 gambusia. I have no earthly idea why he finally decided that 100 bass is better, and why you didn't want to use crappie, because this is 1939, but he did learn enough from those mishmash of ponds that this was his stocking ratio for Farm Pond 4. And it happened with all of this inductive and deductive logic, all this jumping around minute that he'd been doing. He was right on the money on this stocking rate. He drained the pond then, got 370 pounds per acre. He found that this was an acre pond. Now this is not 1/120th acre. He extrapolated from those small ponds. These were the large pond. This was a large pond, a larger pond. 370 pounds per acre, 89% harvestable if you use his definition of harvestable. 70 pounds of bluegill, 71 largemouth bass, and a few crappie had gotten in the thing and spawned. And a few, hardly any gambusia left, as you might explain. The total production is 478 pounds per acre, and with an FC ratio of 3.4. That's right on what you expect if you stock 100 bass and bluegill ponds in the state of Alabama. That combination, this is what you're going to get. And it came out of those 1/120th acre ponds with 3 replications, and I don't know where the information came on the stocking rate of largemouth bass. Well, he was a genius. He was a wonderful teacher. He everywhere he went, the things he had to say, people listened to. He was just unusual. Everybody was impressed by everything that he said. He did not suffer. If he had a fault, and I was around him a long time, he did not suffer fools easily. and he'd let you know it. He did not suffer fools very easily. I remember at one of the American Fishery things in years ago, he was the chairman about the time he became president of the American Fishery Society, and they had the chief of the Fish and Wildlife Service came in and was presenting a paper, actually giving a talk, and he ran overtime. And Swingle took the microphone away from him. And earned, as you might guess, that man was an enemy of his as long as he lived. He did not suffer fools. He was very wise, he was very smart, and people that worked under him. You either had a tough time with him, taking him on because he was a vicious debater, and he'd usually quick to tear down all the arguments that you have. Or either you worked in another field. John Lawrence just got away from him and moved over in weed control. Ellis Prather stayed with him pretty much, but Ellis had a tough time because Swingle probably was a little too hard intellectually on the people he was working with. I remember one time he didn't run me off, I don't know why, but I was holding forth as I'm doing now on something dear to my heart about something that's happened in the public somewhere. Somebody was, I thought, making a fool out of themselves. And I remarked, talking about this, and he said, Shell, something you have to remember in this world, in this country, there are probably 220 million people in this country, and you know there's bound to be a few fools. So he pretty much told me that you got to expect a bunch of fools around when you have that many people. Well, such is the legacy of Homer Scott Swingle, and such is the legacy of the events. The person in the events, if it hadn't been World War II played an important part in this, certainly the Vietnamese conflict, if you go on down through history, the fact that the so-called domino theory, if it hadn't been for that, there would have been no international program. If it hadn't been for the SCS, this program would never achieve the nationwide acclaim it did. If it hadn't been for the poverty-stricken faculty, they probably wouldn't have fished as much and gotten excited about building their own fish pond. Events mold events and mold people and mold programs. He was smart enough and native intelligence enough that he could take these odd events that he was looking at, these odd results that he was getting, and put them together in his mind so he could come up with this. Well, Swingle and Smith had set this cornerstone in place in late 1937 and early 1938 with this management of farm fish ponds. They worked diligently through the years to fill cracks, and after 1940 the F ponds were out there, the E ponds. The E ponds in those days were 1 acre ponds, where all those 1/10 acre ponds now. So he went out and he repeated all of these experiments in those larger ponds, and they all worked the way it expected to. The one thing that they did not understand, though, anybody, and he left this particular area before he really fully understood this. But as Barry Smith said, anybody in the country can be an outstanding manager of farm fish ponds for 2 years, and then the trouble set in. Once you begin to get reproduction and all those things coming in, then you begin to run into problems. When Swingle finally moved up into the upper place up there and had those S ponds, he had a lot of trouble ever keeping those things in balance. In fact, very few of them were in balance most of the years. So it had been interesting to see if he would have solved those problems over the years, but then he got involved in aquaculture and completely left this area. Smith left the project in 1944. Prather joined him in 1945, Lawrence in 46. A number of other people came along. Through the 40s and 50s and 60s and early 70s, they really worked incessantly on this project. They were working 5.5 days a week from daylight till dark. He had a wonderful group of field people out there. He really paid a lot of attention to his field crew, people names that you won't have any appreciation for, but I'm going to mention them because he would have wanted them recognized. There was Ed T. and Bertha Ogletree, Big Junior Fillmore. If you're out there now, if you do anything out there, you know how important all these people are, and they were extremely important to him. Thomas Watts, Mose Washington, Ernest Dowdell, all those people, a long chain of people out there that worked on that pond that helped him put this thing together. Along the way, Swingle helped to set the cornerstone for modern world aquaculture. In 1968, he served as chairman of the World Symposium on Warm Water Fish Pond Culture in Rome. While Swingle and Associates piled stone on stone, once the cornerstone was there, there are people back, Mary Lou Smith, Ms. Otto, and a long line of people that just kept all this tied together with baling wire back in the office. When Swingle died, shortly before his mandatory retirement in 1973, no other Auburn professor, and I don't think there's any question about this, although Claude Boyd may get a little close to it, Tom Lovell, or David Bain, or somebody, but when Swingle died, there had never been an Auburn professor. In fact, hardly ever been any professors anywhere who almost single-handedly had developed a program from such low roots to international acclaim. It just had never been done. And he did most of it with this inductive, deductive logic and unflinching devotion to what he was doing. He left a world-class program set on a solid foundation. And equally important, he left us with two tools which, if used correctly, would guarantee the continuation of this project and your own personal success. He was a taskmaster more to himself than anybody else. But he showed us that if you will always, always, always stay on task, and if you will always, always try to do just important things, that the program would continue to prosper, and that we will continue to serve well those citizens who pay for this program. You have any questions, comments? I'm through, Lynn.
You did it right on the money, Wayne. That might be the first time.
That's amazing. Boy, when you get my age, you just love the sound of your voice so much, it's hard to stop.
Anybody have any questions? All right, Wayne, thank you very much. We're all in